The Galactic Coalition Academy rose from the surface of a dead moon like a monument to power and war, its towers stretching toward the stars, its halls filled with the greatest warriors and minds from across 100,000 worlds. And on this day, every cadet in the academy had gathered in the Grand Hall to hear news that would change everything. Commandant Vreltosk stood at the center of the massive chamber, his 7-foot frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor, his iridescent scales catching the light from the hovering orbs above, and his 4 eyes swept across the assembled species with the cold calculation of a predator assessing prey. He was Kasari, one of the oldest and most feared species in the known galaxy, and he had commanded this academy for 90 cycles, watching generations of warriors come and go, watching empires rise and fall, and in all that time, he had never once shown mercy or sentiment to anyone. Cadets. His voice boomed through the hall, deep and resonant, carrying to every corner without effort. We have received a distress signal from Research Station Nexus 7. A murmur rippled through the crowd, because everyone knew about Nexus 7. Everyone knew about the rogue planet that drifted through the Carrion expanse like a frozen ghost. A world so hostile that even the thought of it made seasoned warriors shudder. The Commandant raised one clawed hand for silence, and the murmur died instantly. 12 researchers are trapped in a collapsed facility on the planet's surface, he continued. And we have 72 hours to extract them before Nexus 7 drifts beyond our reach forever. He waved his hand, and a holographic display flickered to life above him, showing the planet in all its terrible glory. A sphere of ice and rock spinning through the void, surrounded by swirling clouds of radiation and electromagnetic storms. Surface temperature averages -200 degrees, Vreltosk said, with radiation storms occurring every 6 hours that would cook most organic matter from the inside out. And the atmosphere is a mixture of ammonia and methane that would dissolve lung tissue in minutes. He paused, letting the information sink in, watching the faces of his cadets change as they understood what he was asking. The facility's main entrance is buried under 200 tons of debris, and the only remaining access point is a ventilation shaft that measures 17 inches in diameter. In the crowd, representatives from dozens of species began to shift and whisper among themselves, calculations running through minds both organic and synthetic, probabilities being assessed and reassessed. The Fulvary delegation stood near the front, their thick white fur and massive frames built for the coldest environments in the galaxy. But their leader, a grizzled veteran named Korath, was already shaking his head, because Fulvary lungs could not process methane for more than 40 hours, and the mission would require at least 60. The Thasians clustered together on the left side of the hall, their crystalline bodies humming with natural radiation resistance. But their neural pathways would freeze solid at -150 degrees. And Nexus 7 was far colder than that. The Morkai stood like living statues near the back, silicon-based life forms that could survive almost anything the universe threw at them. But they stood 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, and there was no force in existence that could squeeze them through a 17-inch tunnel one by one. Species after species declined the mission, their representatives stepping forward to explain why their biology made the task impossible, why the mathematics simply did not work, why sending anyone would be nothing more than adding another body to the death. Told Commandant Vreltosk listened to each refusal with something. That might have been disappointment or might have been confirmation of what he already knew. And when the last of the major species had spoken, his gaze drifted to a small group standing near the back of the hall. The humans. There were only 20 of them. The first generation of Earth's children to attend the academy. Admitted not because anyone believed they belonged there, but because the Coalition's charter required that all member species be given the opportunity to prove themselves. They stood together like a tiny island in an ocean of giants, their soft skin and small frames making them look like children playing at war. And every other species in the room regarded them with a mixture of pity and contempt. "The humans," Reltosk announced, his voice carrying a note of dismissal that made several of his fellow Kasari chuckle, "are of course exempt from consideration for this mission." He stepped closer to the holographic display, gesturing at the swirling hell of Nexus 7 with one clawed hand. "Your species cannot regulate its own internal temperature," he said, ticking off points on his fingers. "You require constant oxygen to survive. Your skin ruptures when exposed to vacuum. You possess no natural armor or weapons. And your average lifespan is barely a century." He turned to face the human contingent directly, his four eyes boring into them with something that was not quite cruelty, but was certainly close. "You are, quite simply, too fragile for the galaxy you have stumbled into. And while I commend your species for its ambition in joining the coalition, ambition alone cannot change the fundamental weakness of your biology." The other cadets shifted, some nodding in agreement, others looking away in second-hand embarrassment. And the humans themselves stood in silence, their faces unreadable, their hands clenched at their sides among them. A young woman named Elara Chun felt something burn in her chest, something hot and fierce that she had carried with her since childhood, since the floods that took her city, since the radiation that took her mother, since every moment that the universe had told her she was too small and too weak and too human to matter. She had read the mission file 3 times already, memorizing every detail, calculating every angle. And she knew something that the Commandant did not. She knew that sometimes the smallest key opens the heaviest door. She knew that sometimes fragility was just another word for flexibility. She knew that humans had been surviving impossible odds since before they learned to make fire, since before they spread across their world, since before they reached for the stars with nothing but determination and spite. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to volunteer. The Commandant finished his speech and asked one final time if any cadet wished to accept the mission, his voice making clear that he expected no answer, that this was merely a formality before the researchers on Nexus 7 were declared lost. The Grand Hall fell silent and Elara Chun stepped forward. The sound of her boots on the polished floor echoed through the Grand Hall like thunder, and every eye in the chamber turned to watch the small human woman walk forward through the crowd of gents. Elara Chun stood 5 feet and 6 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a tight knot and eyes that held a fire no one in that room had ever seen before. And when she reached the front of the assembly, she stopped and looked up at Commandant Vreltosk without flinching for a long moment. No one spoke then. A wet, gurgling sound broke the silence, and Elara turned to see a Felvari cadet laughing, his massive white-furred body shaking with amusement, his yellowed teeth bared in what passed for a smile among his kind. "The little mammal wants to play hero," he said, his voice thick with mockery. "How adorable!" Other cadets joined in, a ripple of laughter spreading through the hall, and somewhere behind her, Elara heard a Thashan mutter something about death wishes and primitive species, but she did not move. And she did not look away from the Commandant. Vrelkos stared down at her with all 4 of his eyes, his expression shifting through confusion and annoyance before settling into something like cold amusement. "You cannot be serious." "Cadet Chen, I am completely serious, Commandant. You heard my assessment of your species," he said, his voice flat and hard. "You heard the conditions on Nexus 7. And you understand that every other species in this hall has already declined because the mission is mathematically impossible. I heard everything you said, sir, and yet you still wish to volunteer." "Yes, sir." The Commandant's secondary eyes narrowed, a sign of irritation among the Kesari, and he leaned down until his face was mere inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin, his scales catching the light in patterns that were meant to intimidate. Explain yourself. Human. Alara felt her heart pounding in her chest, felt the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on her, felt the fear that crawled along her spine like a living thing. But she had grown up on a world that tried to kill her every single day, and she had learned long ago that fear was just another obstacle to overcome. Permission to address the assembly. Commandant. He waved a clawed hand dismissively, stepping back to give her the floor. Clearly expecting her to embarrass herself further, Alara turned to face the gathered cadets, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling in her hands. The falvery of the greatest cold-weather warriors in the galaxy. She began, nodding toward the white-furred giants. But their lungs cannot process the methane atmosphere of Nexus 7 for more than 40 hours. And this mission requires at least 60 hours of surface time. The falvery who had laughed at her stopped laughing. The Thasians are immune to radiation that would kill most species instantly, she continued, turning toward the crystalline beings. But their neural pathways freeze and shatter at -150 degrees. And Nexus 7's surface temperature averages -200. The Thasians exchanged glances but said nothing. The Morkai could survive both the cold and the radiation, Alara said, looking toward the massive silicon life forms at the back of the hall. But they cannot fit through the 17-inch ventilation shaft that is the only remaining access point to the survivors. She paused, letting her words sink in, watching the expressions change on faces across the hall. Every species here has a strength that makes them powerful, she said. But every species here also has a weakness that makes this particular mission impossible for them. She turned back to face Commandant Vreltosk. Humans have no natural armor, no resistance to cold, no immunity to radiation, and no ability to survive without oxygen, she said. But we also have no single point of failure that makes this mission automatically impossible for us. The Commandant's eyes narrowed further. You are suggesting that your weakness is somehow a strength. I am suggesting that flexibility has value. Sir. She pulled a small datapad from her pocket and held it up, displaying the facility schematic she had memorized. I have studied the layout of Research Station Nexus 7, she said. And I know that the survivors are located in Section D7, which is accessible only through the ventilation system. And I know that the shaft measures exactly 17 inches in diameter. She set the datapad down and faced the Commandant directly. I can fit through that shaft, sir, and with the right equipment and preparation, I can survive on that surface long enough to reach the survivors and restore power to the facility's emergency beacon. The right equipment, Vreltosk repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. And what equipment would that be, Cadet Chun? What magical human technology will protect your fragile body from an environment that would kill a Kesari warrior in minutes? An exosuit rated for -180 degrees. A rebreather with 16 hours of oxygen, supplemented by field modifications. Thermal gel packs to maintain core temperature. And stimulants to keep me moving when my body wants to shut down. That equipment is not rated for Nexus 7 conditions. No. Sir, it is not. Then you will die. Alara met his gaze and held it. Maybe, she said. But there are 12 people on that planet who will definitely die if no one tries to save them. And I would rather take a chance at saving them than sit here and do nothing while they freeze to death. The Grand Hall fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. This time, there was something other than mockery in the air. Something that might have been respect, or might have been simple confusion at the strange little creature who refused to accept the obvious. Truth Commandant Vreltosk studied her for a long moment, his 4 eyes unblinking, his expression impossible to read. You truly believe you can succeed where every other species has failed. I believe that humans have been surviving impossible odds since before we discovered fire, Alara said. I believe that my ancestors crossed frozen wastelands and burning deserts and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. And I believe that they did it not because they were strong, but because they refused to stop. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin. I am not asking for your confidence. Commandant, I am asking for your permission. The silence stretched on, seconds feeling like hours. And then Vreltosk did something that no one in the hall expected. He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Not a warm laugh, but it was genuine. A deep rumbling sound that echoed off the walls. You have courage. Human, I will give you that, he said. Foolish, suicidal courage. But courage nonetheless. He turned away from her and addressed the hall. Cadet Chen's mission application is approved, he announced. She will depart for Nexus 7 at 0600 hours tomorrow morning. He paused and looked back at her one last time. I hope your ancestors are watching. Cadet Chen, because you are going to need all the luck they can give you. Alara saluted, her hand trembling only slightly. Thank you, sir. She turned and walked back through the crowd of giants, feeling their eyes on her, hearing their whispers, knowing that most of them expected to never see her again. But she also saw something else as she passed. Something in the eyes of her fellow human cadets. Something that looked like pride, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The drop pod screamed through the atmosphere of Nexus 7 like a burning comet, its heat shields glowing orange against the endless black sky. And inside the tiny capsule, Alara Chun gripped her harness and counted her heartbeats. She had spent the night before preparing, checking and rechecking her equipment, running simulations, studying every piece of data about the planet that the Coalition had ever collected. And she had not slept at all, because sleep felt like a luxury she could not afford now. As the pod shook and rattled around her, as warning lights flashed and alarms screamed in her ears, she thought about her mother. Maria Chun had been a doctor in the Jakarta flood shelters, working 18-hour shifts to save people who had lost everything, refusing to stop even when the radiation from the collapsed power plant began to poison her blood. And she had died with a smile on her face because she had saved 47 lives before her body finally gave out. Alara had been 11 years old when she buried her mother. And she had promised herself that day that she would never stop fighting, never stop reaching, never stop trying to save the people who needed saving. The pod hit the surface of Nexus 7 with a force that drove the breath from her lungs and sent pain exploding through her body. She felt something crack in her chest, felt the sharp agony of broken ribs grinding against each other. And for a moment she could not move, could not breathe, could only lie there in the darkness and wonder if this was where her story ended. But then she thought about the 12 researchers waiting for rescue, thought about their families back home who would never see them again if she failed. And she forced herself to move. The pod's hatch blew open with a hiss of escaping pressure, and Alara stumbled out onto the frozen surface of an alien world. The cold hit her like a physical blow, slamming into her exosuit and trying to claw its way through to her skin. And she could feel her suit's heating elements working at maximum capacity just to keep her alive. The sky above her was black and empty. No stars visible through the swirling clouds of radiation and toxic gas. And the ground beneath her feet was a sheet of ice so cold that it would have frozen her solid in seconds. Without protection, she checked her navigation system and found her bearings, the research facility showing as a small blip on her display. 18 kilometers to the northeast, 18 kilometers across a frozen hell with broken ribs and limited oxygen. She started walking. The first 3 hours were the hardest, every step sending fresh waves of pain through her chest, every breath feeling like fire in her lungs. And the cold seemed to seep through her suit. No matter how hard the heating elements worked, she passed through valleys of black, Ice and climbed over ridges of frozen stone. And all around her the planet seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if it knew she was there and wanted her dead at the 6-hour mark. The radiation storm hit. She had been watching her sensors, tracking the electromagnetic buildup in the atmosphere. And when the alarm started screaming, she had maybe 90 seconds to find shelter. She spotted a crevasse in the ice 50 meters ahead and ran for it, her broken ribs screaming in protest, her legs burning with exhaustion. And she threw herself into the narrow opening just as the sky turned white with deadly energy. The storm raged above her for 2 hours, and she lay in the darkness of her tiny shelter, listening to her Geiger counter shriek with radiation readings that would have killed an unprotected human in minutes, feeling her suit strain against forces it was never designed to handle. When the storm finally passed, she checked her equipment and found that her rebreather had been damaged, its oxygen output dropping to 60% of normal. And she realized that she had maybe 12 hours of breathable air left instead of the 16 she had planned for. She did the math in her head and understood that she would not make it to the facility and back on 12 hours of oxygen. Then she opened her suit's maintenance panel and started improvising. Her mother had taught her to fix things, had shown her how to rebuild water purifiers from scrap metal and patch radiation suits with nothing but tape and hope. And Alara had inherited that gift for making broken things work. She pulled components from non-essential systems and jury-rigged a secondary filter for her rebreather, sacrificing her suit's communication, array, and backup navigation in exchange for another 8 hours of oxygen. It was not enough. It would have to be enough. She climbed out of the crevasse and kept walking. By hour 15, her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves, the cold finally winning its battle against her suit's heating elements, and she could no longer feel her feet, which was probably a mercy because the pain would have been unbearable by hour 20. Her vision was starting to blur, her body beginning to shut down from the combined stress of cold and exhaustion and injury. And she had to stop every few hundred meters just to remember which direction she was supposed to be moving. She thought about giving up. She thought about lying down in the ice and letting the cold take her, letting the pain finally stop, letting someone else be the hero for once. But then she thought about her mother, and she thought about the 12 people waiting in the darkness of a collapsed facility, and she thought about every single person who had ever told her that humans were too weak and too fragile and too soft to matter. And she kept walking. The research facility appeared on the horizon like a mitral skeleton rising from the ice, its towers twisted and broken, its walls buried under mountains of frozen debris. And Alara felt something like hope flicker in her chest. For the first time since landing, she found the main entrance and saw immediately that the commandant's information had been correct. The doorway completely blocked by at least 200 tons of ice and rubble that would take heavy equipment and weeks of work to clear. But she also found the ventilation shaft, exactly where the schematics had promised. A narrow opening in the facility's outer wall that led into darkness, 17 inches in diameter. She looked at the shaft, then looked at her body and realized that she would not fit. Not with her suit's rigid framework and equipment pack. She had two choices. She could turn back and die in the ice with nothing accomplished, or she could do something that would probably kill her anyway, but might give the survivors a chance. She stripped off her outer equipment, leaving only the thin inner layer of her suit, and she grabbed the edge of the shaft with hands she could no longer feel. And she started to pull herself inside. Her shoulder caught on the edge, too wide to fit through, and she knew what she had to do. She braced herself against the wall, took a deep breath of recycled oxygen, and dislocated her own shoulder with a single sharp motion. The pain was wide and absolute, a scream that tore from her throat and echoed off the frozen walls. And for a moment she was certain she would pass out and die right there in that narrow opening, but she did not pass out. She gritted her teeth and pulled herself forward, her ruined shoulder dragging against the metal, her broken ribs grinding with every inch of progress. And she crawled into the darkness of the facility's maintenance tunnels. She crawled toward the people who needed her. She crawled because that was what humans did. They crawled and they climbed and they kept moving forward, no matter how much the universe wanted them to stop. And Alara Chun was not going to stop, not today, not ever. The maintenance tunnels stretched before her like the throat of some massive beast, dark and cold and endless, and Alara dragged herself through them inch by painful inch, her dislocated shoulders screaming with every movement, her broken ribs making each breath feel like swallowing broken glass. Her helmet light flickered and dimmed, the battery draining faster than it should in the extreme cold. And she found herself moving through darkness more often than light, feeling her way along the metal walls, trusting the map in her memory to guide her forward. Time lost all meaning in that darkness. She could have been crawling for hours or days or years, and it would have felt exactly the same, an eternity of pain and cold and a simple stubborn refusal to stop. But finally, after what her suit's damaged clock told her was 4 hours of crawling, she saw light ahead, a faint glow, weak and flickering but unmistakably artificial. And Alara pushed herself toward it with the last reserves of strength she possessed. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and there they were, 12 survivors huddled together in an emergency shelter, their bodies pressed close for warmth, their faces pale and frightened in the dying light of a failing power cell. 8 Valosians with their blue-green skin and 4 arms, 3 Terek with their insectoid carapaces and compound eyes, and 1 human, a man with gray hair and a weathered face, who stared at Alara as if she were a ghost. "My name is Cadet Alara Chun," she said, her voice barely a whisper through her cracked lips. "I am here to rescue you." For a moment, no one moved. Then the human man rushed forward and caught her as her legs finally gave out, lowering her gently to the ground, his hands checking her suit and her vitals with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb," he said, "xenogeologist. And you are either the bravest person I have ever met or the craziest. Probably both." Alara managed to say Dr. Webb helped her sit up against the wall while the other survivors gathered around, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "How did you get here?" one of the Valosians asked, her voice trembling. "The Commandant said no rescue was possible." The Commandant was wrong. Alara looked around the shelter and saw the situation clearly. The failing power cell that was the only thing keeping them warm, the dwindling oxygen supplies, the fear in every face. How long until your power fails completely? Dr. Webb checked his instruments and shook his head. 6 hours. Maybe 7, and then the temperature in here will drop to match outside. And none of us will survive. Alara closed her eyes in thought, her mind racing through possibilities and probabilities, searching for a solution that did not exist. Her oxygen was nearly gone. Her body was shutting down. She had no communication equipment, no way to signal for rescue, no way to dig through 200 tons of debris to reach the outside world. But there had to be something. There had to be a way, because she had not crawled through 18 kilometers of frozen hell and dislocated her own shoulder just to die 6 hours before rescue could arrive. "The facility's backup generator," she said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. "Is it still functional?" Dr. Webb stared at her. "The generator is in Section B3, on the other side of the facility, in an area that was exposed when the roof collapsed," he said slowly. "The temperature there is the same as outside, and the radiation levels are lethal. But if someone could reach it and activate it, could you send a distress signal strong enough to reach the Coalition fleet?" "Yes, but that is not possible. No one could survive that exposure. Alara looked at the 12 survivors, at their frightened faces and trembling bodies, at the children of a dozen different worlds who had come here to study and learn and push the boundaries of knowledge. She thought about her mother, working herself to death in a flood shelter to save people she had never met. She thought about her father, still building homes for refugees on Earth, still believing that tomorrow could be better than today. She thought about what it meant to be human, to be fragile and weak and soft, to be everything the galaxy said they were, and to refuse to accept it. How far is Section B3? 300 meters, through corridors that have been open to the elements for days. And how long would I need to stay there to activate the generator? There, Webb's face went pale as he understood what she was asking. 5 minutes. Maybe 6, but your suit is already damaged. Your body is already compromised. You would die out there before you made it halfway. Alara pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking, her shoulder burning, her ribs grinding together with every breath. Then I had better move fast. Dr. Webb grabbed her arm. Chun, don't do this. The math does not work. You will die out there, and we will still die in here. And your sacrifice will mean nothing. Alara looked down at his hand, then up at his face, and she smiled. Humans have never been very good at math. Dear Webb, she pulled her arm free and moved toward the exit. Each step, an act of will. Each breath, a small victory against the body that was trying to shut down. Wait, one of the Velosians called out. Why are you doing this? Why would you die for strangers you have never met? Alara stopped at the doorway and turned back to face them. Because someone has to, she said. Because 12 people should not die alone on a frozen rock at the edge of nowhere. Because my mother taught me that every life matters. And because the galaxy keeps telling humans what we cannot do. And we keep forgetting to listen. She stepped through the doorway and into the corridor beyond. The cold hit her immediately, far worse than anything she had experienced on the surface. And she could feel her suit's heating elements struggling and failing. Unable to keep up with the brutal temperature, she started walking 300 meters. Her feet were blocks of ice, and she could no longer feel anything below her knees. 200 meters. Her hands had stopped working. Her fingers curled into useless claws, and she had to use her elbows to push open doors. 100 meters. Her vision was going dark at the edges, her brain starving for oxygen, and she could hear her heartbeat slowing in her ears. A drum that was running out of rhythm. 50 meters. The generator room appeared before her. A massive chamber opened to the black sky, filled with snow and ice and the deadly whisper of radiation. And at its center stood the backup generator. Dark and silent and waiting, Alara crossed the threshold and felt the last of her suit's protection fail. Felt the cold rush in like water into a sinking ship. Felt her body begin to die. But she did not stop. She reached the generator with hands that could no longer feel. And she found the manual release with eyes that could barely see. And she bit down on the handle because her fingers would not work. And she pulled with her teeth and her neck and every lost ounce of strength. She possessed the panel opened. She threw herself against the activation lever, slamming her body into it again and again because her arms would not respond. And on the third impact, she felt something give, felt the lever move, felt the generator hum to life. Beneath her, lights flickered on throughout the facility. Somewhere in Section D7, a distress beacon began to transmit. Alara collapsed in the snow, her body finally surrendering to everything it had endured. And she lay there staring up at the alien stars through a haze of ice crystals, feeling the cold wrap around her like a blanket. Feeling the darkness close in from all sides, her last thought before unconsciousness took her was a simple one. She hoped it had been enough. Alara Chun woke to the sound of machines beeping and the smell of antiseptic. And for a long moment she did not know where she was or how she had gotten there. The ceiling above her was white and smooth, nothing like the black sky of Nexus 7, and the air was warm and clean. Nothing like the frozen poison she had been breathing for so long. And she wondered briefly if she had died, and this was whatever came after. Then the pain hit her. A wave of agony that rolled through her body and reminded her that she was very much alive. "She is awake," a voice said. Somewhere to her left, and Alara turned her head to see a Velosian doctor standing beside her bed, her blue-green skin glowing softly in the medical bay's lights, her four hands moving across a display of vital signs and treatment protocols. "Where am I?" Alara asked, her voice a broken whisper. "The Galactic Coalition Academy Medical Center," the doctor replied. "You have been unconscious for 17 days. 17 days." Alara closed her eyes and let that number sink in, trying to remember what had happened after she activated the generator, after she collapsed in the snow. "After the darkness took her, the survivors," she said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. "The 12 people on Nexus 7, did they make it? Are they alive?" The Velosian doctor smiled, a strange expression on her alien face, but unmistakably warm. "All 12 survivors were evacuated 6 hours after you restored power to the facility's distress beacon, and every single one of them is alive and recovering." Alara felt something break inside her chest. Not pain this time, but relief. A wave of emotion so powerful that tears began to stream down her face before she could stop them. She had done it. Against all odds. Against all logic. Against everything the galaxy had told her was possible. She had saved them. The doctor gave her a moment to compose herself, then continued in a more serious tone. "You suffered severe frostbite to your extremities, and we were forced to amputate 3 fingers from your left hand. Your lungs collapsed during the evacuation and required extensive reconstruction. And the radiation exposure you sustained will require treatment for at least the next 5 years. Alara looked down at her left hand and saw the bandages where her fingers used to be, and she felt a strange detachment, as if she were looking at someone else's body. "The doctors on the rescue ship were not sure you would survive the journey back to the academy," the Velosian said. "And when you arrived, the medical team here was not sure you would ever wake up." She paused, her 4 eyes studying Alara with an expression that was hard to read. "We have treated warriors from 100 different species in this facility. Soldiers and fighters who were bred for battle, designed for survival. And I've never seen anyone cling to life the way you did." Alara did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The days that followed were a blur of treatments and therapies and visitors. An endless stream of faces, both human and alien, who came to see the cadet who had done the impossible. Her fellow human cadets came first, standing around her bed with tears in their eyes, telling her that she had made them proud to be human, that she had shown the galaxy what their species was capable of, that she was a hero. The Velosian survivors came next, all 8 of them crowding into her room to thank her in their native language, pressing their foreheads to hers in a gesture of deepest gratitude, promising that they would never forget what she had done. Dr. Marcus Webb came every day, bringing her food from the academy, cafeteria, and stories from the news feeds that were spreading her story across the coalition. "You are famous. You know," he told her one afternoon. "Every species in the galaxy is talking about the human cadet who walked through hell to save a dozen strangers. I did not do it for fame. I know," he said. "That is what makes it remarkable." On the 23rd day, Commandant Vreltosk came to see her. He stood at the foot of her bed in his formal uniform, all 7 feet of Khazari power and authority, his 4 eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I have commanded this academy for 90 cycles," he said slowly. "I have seen Morkai warriors and Khazari champions and beings that could crack planets with their minds." He paused, and something changed in his expression. Something that Alara had never seen before. "I have never seen anything like you." Alara met his gaze and held it. "I am not special, Commandant. I am just human." "Yes, Reltas replied. And for the first time since she had known him, there was something other than contempt in his voice. That is precisely what I mean. He turned and left without another word. But Alara understood what he had been trying to say. The news of her mission spread across the coalition like wildfire, carried on data streams and transmitted through relay stations, whispered in cantinas and debated in council chambers, and everywhere it went. It changed the way people thought about the strange soft creatures from the little blue planet within a year. Human enrollment at the academy tripled, young men and women from Earth flooding through the gates, eager to prove that they belonged among the stars within 5 years. Every special operations team in the coalition requested at least one human member, not for their strength or their technology, but for something the galaxy had no word for. Something that had been demonstrated on the frozen surface of a rogue planet by a young woman who refused to give up. Alara recovered slowly, learning to use her damaged hand, learning to breathe with her reconstructed lungs, learning to live with the knowledge that her body would never be quite the same as it was before. But she did not stop. She graduated at the top of her class, the first human to ever achieve that distinction. And she was immediately recruited for the coalition's most elite unit, a team of specialists who handled the missions that no one else could handle. She rose through the ranks with a speed that surprised everyone except those who had seen her walk through the killing cold of Nexus 7. And by the time she was 40 years old, she had been appointed Admiral of the Coalition's first contact fleet, the youngest officer to ever hold that position years later. At a ceremony honoring the anniversary of her famous rescue, a young cadet from a species Alara did not recognize approached her with a question. Admiral Chun, the other species say that humans are weak and fragile, but you proved them wrong. So what is it that makes humans special? What is it that lets you do the impossible? Alara looked at the young cadet, at the curiosity in their eyes, at the hope that maybe they too could be more than what others expected. We are not special, she said. We are small and soft, and we break easily. And the universe has been trying to kill us since the moment we crawled out of the ocean. She smiled. The same smile she had given Dr. Webb on Nexus 7. The smile of someone who knew exactly how fragile she was and had chosen to keep fighting anyway. But we have something that the galaxy does not understand. Something that cannot be measured or quantified. Something that has carried us from caves to stars. What is that? Alara looked out through the window at the stars, at the infinite hostile beautiful void that had tried so hard to kill her. And she thought about her mother and her father and every human who had ever refused to accept that tomorrow had to be worse than today. We call it hope, she said. We call it spite. We call it love for the ones we refuse to leave behind. She turned back to the young cadet and placed her damaged hand on their shoulder. The galaxy keeps telling us what we cannot survive, and we keep forgetting to listen.